everyone, and welcome to the first episode of The Learning Curve, Commercial Property Executives podcast series featuring young professionals across commercial real estate. Here they share their firsthand experiences and advice as they navigate the early stages of their career. I'm your host, Mikayla Sciortino, and today I'm joined by Tobias Hipp, Senior Associate at Kidder Mathews, where we discuss navigating imposter syndrome, personal milestones, and what it takes to be an industrial broker in today's market. Hi, Tobias. Thank you so much for being the first guest on this podcast. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm great. Just before we dive into these questions, if you want to give me a little bit of your background so far within your career, that would be great.
So I have been in commercial real estate as a broker here at Kidder Mathews for coming up about 4 years. Started fresh out of college in 2022. Took about a month or two off, jumped right into the business, and going on about 4 years strong.
Great. So as you said that you started pretty much fresh out of college with your 2-month little hiatus from graduation to career, what was your first introduction to commercial real estate brokerage?
Yeah, so my first introduction was actually way back when I was in middle school. I remember this vividly. I had taken a trip to New York City, so many tall buildings. And when I walked out of the subway for the first time, I knew it was kind of something I wanted to get into the subjects of real estate. I didn't know which way I wanted to go, but I remember thinking someone owns all these buildings. And from that point forward, I knew I wanted to do something in real estate.
Okay, wow. Okay, so it's been kind of an up and coming kind of dream, I guess you could say.
Yeah. And I think from that point, I started gearing my search for schools, midway through college to a school that had a real estate degree. Mm-hmm. It's not that common, but there were some that were on my radar that I looked forward to. So kind of dove into that and picked my schools that I applied to based off their business school and if they had a real estate degree there.
Okay, so based on that, where did you end up graduating from, and what was your degree?
Yeah, so I graduated from Colorado State University in Fort Collins, go Rams, with a degree in real estate finance. So it wasn't necessarily straight real estate, but I had a finance sector to it where, we learn the numbers, the back end, instead of just strictly real estate brokerage. Something that I learned, in the beginning of the degree was a lot of these degrees are geared towards residential real estate, at least for the Colorado State program. So it was more learning the ropes of how to value a deal, not necessarily commercial real estate. But again, it taught me everything I needed to know in a sense of what direction I wanted to head in.
And then prior to getting your job at Kidder Mathews, was there a specific sector that you wanted to work in? You mentioned that when you traveled to New York, you were mesmerized by all of the tall office buildings. Did you want to go into office? I know you are now in industrial. Was that an avenue that you were considering?
Yeah, I was kind of looking at everything. I honestly knew nothing, given that it was residential focus. I just knew commercial, bigger properties, bigger deals. And so my goal during school was, hey, let's reach out to as many real estate professionals as I can. So, through LinkedIn messaging during COVID, I had a lot of time on my hands to ping as many people on LinkedIn as I could. It was office brokers, it was retail brokers, it was industrial. But seeing the industrial markets here in Southern California, I think that definitely played a role and steered me towards doing industrial.
Yeah, and industrial over the last couple of years, I guess since COVID, has been having its moments. So everything kind of happens for a reason, right?
Yeah, and it feels like the Southern California market, no matter what, is not going to slow down. Little hiccups here and there during COVID, after COVID, still going on now, but it's still here and it's churning. So it's a machine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then since you have begun your career, or looking back when you first started your first couple of months, was there anything within brokerage or even just the industry that you didn't know about that surprised you while you were well in the weeds?
Yeah, besides not knowing, necessarily how deals were structured in numbers, I think the biggest thing I learned was that it's more psychology based. It's dealing with emotions, dealing with buyer and seller's egos. And then a lot of it's just timing. You have to have people who need to move or need to buy, and have sellers who need to sell or need to lease out their buildings. But again, dealing with the emotions of buyers and sellers was something that I had to adapt to. Felt like I was good talking to people, but definitely real estate's a little bit different than just being out in the real world.
I feel like that is the case with everything. There's always something within a career where you're always taken aback by when you're into it. And speaking of that, a lot of early career professionals and even well into their career deal with imposter syndrome. Have you ever had a case of imposter syndrome over the last 4 years since you've been working?
Yeah, I feel like it felt like the first full almost 2 years. You have so much time to build your database, call people, but then it really comes into play when you're walking into meetings with owners that have owned buildings longer than I've even been alive. So it's building credibility, but you have to do it quickly. And so the biggest thing I realized to get through imposter syndrome was over preparing. It's everything. If you come knowing your market, knowing the numbers, it's pretty easy to earn respect if you know what you're talking about. But again, the first 2 years of the business is all building from the ground up. At least on my side of things, it wasn't necessarily a big team. It was me and 3 other guys, but we worked pretty individually. If you needed another partner to work on a deal, you could bring him in. But he wanted me to be a solo broker. I could run my own business, and I had to over prepare for everything to try to wean out feeling like an imposter.
Exactly. Yeah. And it always is a little uncomfortable as you start, and so it's nice to know that there are ways to get through it, and it's always better to be over prepared than under prepared.
Yeah, and I feel like the confidence came from just repetition. Doing tours, opinion of values, lots of cold calls, losing deals. I mean, waking up at night thinking about a deal, in the shower thinking about a deal. I mean, all the time, and it's just from repeating, coming from reps.
And within those 2 years, like you said, you used those 2 years while you were going through imposter syndrome, or feeling the imposter syndrome, I should say. So while feeling a little bit more uncomfortable in your role, especially in the beginning, do you ever feel that there were ever assumptions made if you were like the youngest in the room, or underestimated because you were just starting out in your career?
It definitely crossed my mind, but I don't think it was a limiting factor. I mean, it's always in the back of your mind, but I went to school. I'm part of a good company. I'm part of a good team. I have a mentor who's taught me everything he possibly can, and still does. I kind of leaned into the preparation, understanding my markets, over time, just becoming consistent at what I do. So calling, planning, touring, setting meetings, understanding the market. And then, once I'm able to see results, and once other people in my company do, it was that kind of got the ball rolling. The assumptions disappeared at that point.
All right. So what has been the most rewarding part of your career thus far?
I think still to this day, the obvious one is seeing the commission finally hit your account.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough.
It never gets old. It's the most rewarding. You see a deal that goes from, first conversation of a cold call who I've never talked to closing is probably the most rewarding part of a business. Second, earning repeat business. So when you work with a client that you've put in a building prior, sold a building prior, and they want to start the search for the next one, that's a big validation, realizing that you're the one that they're calling first. That's been the most rewarding on my end.
Yeah. Has there been like a certain deal that was relatively big that you're really proud of that you were able to close?
My first sale, I repped the buyer on a building in Santa Fe Springs down here. It was my second year in the business, one of my first cold calls, probably one of my first 150 cold calls. I try to make 50 a day. So it was probably my third, fourth day. I'd gotten this guy on the phone, didn't need anything at the time, but I kept pinging him over the months, and eventually said, hey, we want to move. Started out as a lease, and then started out saying, hey, we want to purchase a building. So from there, we started the hunt, luckily expanded outside of his markets, started showing him buildings all over. And that 25,000 square foot, $8 million sale was my first big ticket that, really made me excited and was extremely rewarding.
Yeah. And then what are you most excited about looking ahead?
What most excites me is getting my book of business rolling. They typically say it takes you anywhere from 3 to 5 years to get the ball rolling. So it's about scaling more clients, staying busier. I know there's going to be a point where I'm not going to be able to make my cold calls anymore, where, deals are going to start to take over my days from start to finish. So hiring on someone else that can handle my database for me, super exciting. Bigger assignments, more complex deals, land development. And then at the end of the day, being looked at as more of an advisor than just a broker. Because, anyone can lease someone a building, but at that point, it's telling my clients things that they don't want to hear, but they trust me and allow me to help make the decision for them.
So I know we talked a little bit about being a little bit uncomfortable in the beginning and just repetition. When it comes to cold calls, that can be a bit uncomfortable for some people. Was that something you experienced?
Yeah, definitely. It was in the beginning, it was more, what do I need to say? How do I say it? Talking to my peers. Because at the end of the day, I'd never done a sales job. I'd never known how to cold call. And it was at the point where I thought, hey, let's drop the script, try to be human, and, almost match the emotions of the people that I'm calling. A lot of the calls sound pretty repetitious, but, you're just trying to update the people you're calling about the market. The more you try to sell them, I feel like the more they push away. So, just repeatedly calling my database over and over the past, let's say 4 years now. I call them probably every 4 months. So you can imagine 3 times a year, 4 years, that's 12 times total for people that I haven't talked to. So for those that I have, it's constantly once a month, twice a month, and then just building the relationship. So it was a little nerve wracking at first, but now it's a machine that you can kind of just roll with. You get a no, you move on to the next, you get a yes, you start pinging them and keep the research up on their end. But at this point, it's become so repetitious in my day to day that it's nothing that deters me anymore.
For people who are looking to get into brokerage and maybe are also a little bit more uncomfortable with the cold calls, is there anything that you wish you had been told? Or even just in general, is there anything you wish you had been told?
The biggest thing, so starting with cold calls, was it's something that needs to be done. I mean, there's some groups that, don't necessarily cold call and still get deals done. And I honestly don't understand how they do it. It's a necessary part where you could call someone on a good day, you can call someone on a bad day, and you can learn so much about their needs. Email marketing is one thing, mailers are another, but speaking to people on the phone, like my mentor, Tom Holland said, you want to make $50 a day. You're not going to burn out. If you do 100, you're eventually going to burn out. You're not going to want to make cold calls anymore, but 50 a day is that sweet spot where you'll get the right amount of answers, you'll get the right amount of no's. And then, something that I could go back and tell myself that I didn't know was being able to play the long game. I realized quick that there's nothing quick about this business. You can't chase commissions because these deals sometimes take, a month. And then sometimes these deals take 5-6 years. So they range, a lot of the deals, are a year or two length. So when you start to chase quick commissions, it can sometimes damage your reputation because of some things you want to do just for money. But you got to realize that it's going to take a couple of years for these things to start rolling.
On days or weeks that you feel like the job is getting a little harder, you're just getting a little exhausted, how do you reinvigorate yourself to get back out there and keep closing deals?
I think the best thing personally that I do is honestly just keeping my head down. My mentor, he always would say, consistency builds relationships. So being able to come in day after day, forget what I had done the previous day and do it all over again. So it was coming in, making my dials, realizing that these small steps that I'm making today are going to make a big difference in 2 years, 3 years time. So instead of thinking, hey, I need to calm down. I need to take a step back. It was, let's dive deeper. Let's still do everything that I'm doing. I know it's right. It's just not the right timing right now. So it's that first initial, 1 to 3 years where you need to just keep doing the exact same thing each day. And eventually it's going to turn out.
What was a moment in your career where you thought, I'm doing exactly what I meant to do?
First time I thought I'm exactly where I need to be was when I was able to control a deal on at least my side, the buyer side, from start to finish. We finally closed, and I popped my feet up on the desk knowing that I sourced it, I structured it, I pushed it through to the end, and was able to get my client the building that he wanted. He was happy. He was able to move his business into a building immediately and start getting set up. It was the most satisfying feeling I could have ever imagined. So
in the near future, I know we talked a little bit about, what's ahead, but in the next stage of your career, what are your main goals?
Yeah, a few main goals of mine are to become the first call for industrial owners in my area. So, kind of being that face, that image of the 60 corridor here from City of Industry all the way out in the IE, the 60 corridor specialist is what I like to label myself as. So for anyone that needs help out here, being that person they call, developing from just a broker to more of an advisor, being able to tell my clients when they're wrong, having them trust, my experience and the data that backs it up. And, ultimately building a book of business that's durable through highs and lows, build many great relationships. And again, at the end of the day, eventually, pairing my brokerage with ownership, hopefully on the investment side.
So you've mentioned your mentor a lot over this conversation. What do you think has been the most beneficial thing you have learned from them?
Okay. Most beneficial from my mentor was setting a schedule. He, when I first came in, told me that, hey, this is going to be a job. 12 hours a day, I'm going to need you in here for you to be successful. So what I did was I listened to him. I came in, started from 7 to 7, eventually shifted my schedule now, did 5 to 5. Now I'm doing 6 to 6. So 12 hours a day gives you enough time in the day to database in the morning, make my calls, set my meetings in the afternoon. He told me, hey, you're going to make mistakes, but you got to learn to fix them. So he helped me understand that, there's a lot of time in this business. It takes time to build your book. It takes time to build your relationships and, ultimately trusting him. He's seen multiple cycles. And so he let me know, hey, things are shifting. There's no reason to panic. You're doing everything right. And I think it turned out well in my end. I mean, what I'm doing now has compounded, and I still do the same things that I did in my first 2 weeks. It's just the second half of my days are busier. And now talking to more owners, doing more tours, writing more offers, and, really learning the business from him. He showed me how to structure deals, timing, leverage, when to push, when to back off, and then ultimately just building confidence in myself. He was great at that, showing me the ropes. And, he's that guy who's been there and says, hey, that's normal. Keep pushing through.
What has been one of your biggest learning experiences in your career?
In my career, I learned early, again, from my mentor, Tom, was don't make assumptions. You need everything in writing. You need to make sure that anything that you say is true. When you start to make assumptions and they're incorrect, that's where you get into trouble. So being able to confidently say, what type of power is in a building, or if the carpet's going to get replaced, or if you're going to get the walls painted. When you start, showing buildings and saying, oh yeah, they'll do this, they'll do that. And at the end of the day, the property's being marketed. There's a lot of competing offers, and you get the deal, but you don't get some of the TIs in that building because the ownership knew you were competing. It's a sense of keeping your clients happy and not making assumptions and having everything out in writing. So, things early on that I may have overlooked was not necessarily diving into that. And then second, being consistent. A lot of the deals that I lost out on were just because I wasn't annoying enough to the point where ownership saw my name. Again, they had been being pinged by guys that have been in the business for 10, 15 years. Me coming in a year thought, hey, me talking to you a few times would grant you using me as your real estate broker. But ultimately the follow-up, being the annoying guy, sitting in every building and trying to be that face in front of them when the time comes.
Was there any part of your education that you felt prepared you for this industry?
Yeah, I think the education part stemmed from the finance side. Learning to be a broker didn't necessarily come from school, since it was more geared towards the residential appraisal valuation side. It was my finance classes, learning how to value a building, learning cap rates, the general stuff that make a deal in the background, not necessarily how many loading doors does an industrial building have, what's the clear height. Those are all stuff that I had to learn and understand when I got here. But it's the stuff in the background that you don't see when doing valuations, putting together BOVs that matter the most.
If you had one piece of advice to give somebody who is looking to get into brokerage, what would it be?
You have to be ready to grind. Sometimes, you see people that come in at 8 and leave at 5, and it's just not enough time in the day to necessarily make a name for yourself, I feel like. So, being prepared to make the cold calls, being prepared to be in the office all day, being prepared to work on the weekends, it comes to the territory. It's an easy job, but it's a lot of work. So the deals are pretty cut and paste. Sometimes they get, a little bit advanced with, power requirements, build outs. But it's just being in your consistency day to day. You got to play the long game. You can't chase quick commissions, and your name compounds over time in this business. So the more calls you make, the more people are going to see your face, and down the line, the more they're gonna call you when they need something. So, at the end of the day, don't look at your neighbors, don't compare their timelines. Your path's going to be different, but as long as you're in the office every day doing what you need to do, you're going to be successful.
Okay, great. Tobias, this was so great and very insightful. I appreciate you sharing your experiences with me.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
All right, yeah, no problem. Thanks. Thanks to everyone who tuned into this episode of The Learning Curve. If you like this episode, make sure to follow and rate CPE's podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.